So just to reiterate, we are from the National Library of Technology, specifically from the team called Center for Repositories and Metadata Management that is headed by Petra Černohlávková, sitting right there. That is taking care of a lot of activities, including the National Catalog of Repositories, and also the center supports a service, let's say, called the National Center for Persistent Identifiers, which is why we are here. I am the head of the center, and there is Hana, which is the coordinator of the National ORCID Center, and Jakub, coordinator of the National DOI Center, which are two main services. This is our agenda. We are going to be basically talking about persistent identifiers in the context of the National Data Infrastructure, and we are going to dive deeper into the recommended persistent identifiers for research outputs, samples, instruments, researchers, and research organizations. For the beginning, good news, there is a methodology for persistent identifiers in NDI that is being developed. We are definitely going to be asking for your feedback on it at some point. We are hoping to have it done in the first quarter of next year. Quick definition of persistent identifiers for the beginning. Persistent identifiers are long-lasting, managed, and registered, unique digital references to an object that can be represented or described online. So they are digital, globally unique, persistent, machine actionable, have a metadata schema, etc., etc. And I know that you have already heard quite a bit about persistent identifiers. So let's go ahead. What can you associate a persistent identifier with? Basically, any entity in the research cycle, you can assign a PID to digital objects, to abstract objects, but also to physical objects such as research samples or instruments. There is a lot of persistent identifiers. These are only selected ones for the three specific entities, for objects or research outputs. There is a lot of them. This is not by any means exhaustive. This is just supposed to show you that there is a multitude of persistent identifiers, and it might be difficult to know which one to use. So before we tell you how to tackle that, let's recap quickly how the persistent identifiers are, let's say, talked about different parts of the national data infrastructure. So first of all, regarding NRP, there is a document called the Recommendations for Creating Repositories in the National Repository Platform Environment, authored by Milan Jeníček, Ilja Heringová, and Daniel Mikšík, that says metadata records in the repository must be tagged with persistent identifiers. So it just says that, so you have to use persistent or should be using persistent identifiers. It doesn't tell you which one. It also says it is up to you to choose the appropriate type of PID and determine how and when they are assigned. Regarding National Metadata Directory, basically that part harvests metadata records along with the PIDs that are selected in these records or in these repositories. For the National Catalog of Repositories, as you, I don't know if Alex showed that specifically, but you will be requested to include the persistent identifier types used in the repository and the persistent identifiers that the repository supports for persons. For CCMM, or technically CCMM is PID agnostic, but in the CCMM methodology, which is also in development, there is going to be some recommendations, and that is to use DOIs for datasets, ORCID IDs for persons, and ROR IDs for organizations. It is important to remember that ORCIDs and ROR IDs are going to be used in NMA dashboards, and if your repository don't provide them, each author will be considered as new or unique. And here you can see an example of how a DOI might show up in the CCMM. There is the full URL version of the PID. the actual value, the DOI of the schema, and its label. So now that we know all that, we know that there is a certain flexibility. Nevertheless, these 3 PIDs are recommended for you to use. So using DOIs for objects or research outputs, ORCID for researchers, and ROR IDs for research organizations. There are 2 services built to support this, the National DOI Center and the National ORCID Center. We are trying to support ROR in different ways, but it is a little different from DOI and ORCID. So we did not really create something more like official, let's say. So once again, there is a certain flexibility. You can select a different PID to use instead of the 3 recommended ones. There are many tools or materials to help you do that. You can consult that selection with us. But to be very honest, we will end up asking you a lot of questions, and because you are the one who knows your repository the best and all the requirements that go along with it. But the ultimate result or the ultimate thing to know is that if you don't end up using the recommended persistent identifiers, you don't have any support for those that is going to be guaranteed to you. And I'm talking about not only methodological or financial support, but also technical. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Jakub, and he's going to be talking about one of the recommended identifiers, which is DOI.
Thank you, Hana. Hello, everyone, and thank you for sticking around for our presentation. Yes, so talking about DOI or Digital Object Identifier, an identifier that can be used for various objects in different stages of the research process. Good thing to know that the digital in the Digital Object Identifier can be a little bit confusing because it might give you the impression that only digital objects can be identified using DOI, but the digital actually references to the identifier. So it's about the identifier being digital, but also a physical object can be represented in the digital form using a DOI. So what actually DOIs are solving, the reason is that various objects in the internet where are stored, their location can actually change, but when you want to reference them, you want to reference them in a way that is always the same, that you can always find the metadata at the place that is redirected to. And this is what the DOI is actually doing, that it's always pointing to the place where the object, or at least the metadata about that object, are found. It is based on the handle system, something that I will not get into much, but if you would be interested to know. An important thing that already was mentioned in previous presentation today, DOIs are registered through various registration agencies, the largest of them being Crossref, mainly used by publication processes and publishers, and DataCite that actually was originally started for raising awareness about datasets, and it's mainly used also for assigning DOIs in repositories, and this is actually the registration agency we are using to provide DOI services through the National DOI Center at the National Library of Technology. So one of the advantages compared to, for example, Handle, that's also an parasitic identifier, is the fact that there is actually quite specified metadata schema that can, as was mentioned earlier, vary based on the registration agency, but there is some kind of a standard. Those metadata should also be always accessible. So if you're looking for that object either as a person or through as using machine reading tools, you know what you're looking at and you know what you're finding. And this, let's say, superstructure on top of the identifier can be used for tracking references, visualization, but also it helps other applications being built on top of them, for example, using citation managers, etc. So just coming a little bit to the basics that you're probably aware of, the important thing is it's represented as a string, and it was mentioned by my colleague Hana. Ideally, if you're going to be displaying the DOI as part of your object in your repository, it's good to display it as a whole, the whole URL link, because it's actually user-friendly and helps people to understand what this actually do. Ideally, one DOI references and connects to a single object. And there are some specific cases when it comes to versioning. We will get to it. And it is created, let's say, can be divided into prefix and suffix. Prefix is associated with the repository. So probably if you're going to be creating a repository, you're going to have prefix assigned. All the DOIs minted in their repository will have this beginning with a specific string. And then the specific object is then referenced by the suffix or the end of it. One of the recommendations we would make is to avoid the temptation to put in a meaning into the suffix of the DOI, because this could be short-term look like a very good idea, but because the persistent identifiers are trying to be persistent in the long term, this information could actually get lost or even misunderstood in 10, 15 years. So it's better to use other metadata categories to provide this information and not combine this information into the DOI itself. Coming back to the versioning I already mentioned, this was something also touched upon in earlier presentations today. If there's a non-significant change, this does not necessarily, this means that you don't really need to assign a new DOI. You can just update the metadata. If the change is really significant, a new DOI should be created, and this DOI should be connected to the earlier one. Also, these two DOIs should ideally be connected through a canonical DOI. This is something that you're probably familiar with from Zenodo. Important thing to note, the determination what is and what is not a significant change is really specific to domains, but also to the curators or the managers of the repositories. And this is something that you have to decide. This isn't like something that would have a clear-cut determination. How actually DOI can be registered? Talking about specifically data site services that we are facilitating, you can use the web interface, which is mainly only practical if you're assigning small numbers of DOIs. If you're going to be assigning large number of DOIs to a large number, for example, of data sets, you really want to set up an API connection and automate this process in some kind of way. There's really nice documentation provided by the registration agency that we reference, and you can use the presentation to look into it. Also, what was already mentioned earlier today, there are various platforms and systems that already have some kind of a DOI integration that facilitates the process of minting DOIs to various objects in the repository. One of these papers was presented earlier today by Michal Janinci. Yes, if you would be interested in testing out how actually this process works, both the web interface and the API, you can get in touch with the National DOI Center, and we can set up a test account for you, and you can test this out. This is for free. It's available to anybody who's interested in doing some kind of a research-relevant activity. You don't have to be a member of our consortium or the National DOI Center to access this. You'll just send an email to doi@techlib.cz, and I will set up very quickly an account for you, and you can try out everything. Yes, so one of the things that we also want to cover is some best practices to follow. It's really important to follow the logic of persistent identifiers and, for example, avoid assigning another DOI to an object that already has a DOI, because at the end, this defeats the purpose that you would, for example, be able to trace all the citations of a specific object, because some people could cite the first DOI, the other the second. So before you assign a DOI to an object, make sure that it actually doesn't have one already. When you actually also assign a DOI, you should think about the responsibility that you commit yourself to sustaining the accessibility, at least of the metadata about this object in really long term. This means that you will be able to redirect the URLs, for example, if your web repository moves, etc. In the long term, you should also have ideally a backup plan when it comes to, for example, if your institution would end up servicing, having a plan how you're going to transfer the responsibility for the objects you're actually taking care of. You should only assign the DOIs to the objects that you have under your responsibility. This comes to the aspect of having a clear contract when it comes to the users of your repositories to mention that you actually have the right to assign the DOIs to the objects in the repository. and then to follow the metadata schema so that actually the functionality doesn't get lost. There are various other best practices. They are not going into such a detail, but it's important to fill in as much of the data as possible when it comes to recommended and optional properties, because this is actually what brings the possibility to get some more functionality through the records, because if you only create a DOI with the obligatory metadata, the functionality is a little bit limited. Other thing to use is also connect this object with other entities in the research process when it comes to researchers, using ORCID for the identifying of the researchers or the organizations that are in some way used. And there's also another set of best practices when it comes to landing pages, the places where actually the DOI is redirected, which I will not get into, but important one is that it should be publicly available, so not hidden behind a login, because the object itself doesn't have to be necessarily available, but the record about it or the metadata should be available to anybody. Moving on to also identifiers for samples and instruments are kind of connected to DOIs, because even those can be used to identify samples and instruments. Here mentioning the IGSN, International Generic Sample Number, as an international standard for samples, and PIDs, way how to identify instruments either using DOI or EPIC. Again, in the presentation we have links to guides that you can use to look this up. Here I would like to give a shout out to Marek Sebesauer, who was here at some point but maybe had to go already, and his working group in the NRP Key Activity 5.3, who are working at the automatization of the process of of collecting and assigning identifiers to data and metadata in various pilot cases. And they're also preparing some kind of a pilot database of instruments and samples. So moving on to the support that our center has actually providing to our members. We allow the registration of DOIs, but also IGSNs. For example, the Institute of Archaeology of the Academy of Sciences is already registering quite large numbers of IGSNs. We set up the accounts in the data side systems, and then it's the institution that really manage the day-to-day running and assigning of the DOI. So this is very much run by the institutions themselves. As was mentioned, the repositories that the various institutions have get their prefixes, and then they assign the DOIs. Important thing to note, we provide administrative support as much as possible, but also financial support that we guarantee until the end of 2028 that actually all our members will have no fees assigned to using the DOI services through DataSite. Yes, so just to really final sum up, if you would be interested in using DOI services to our National DOI Center, look at our website and see if actually your organization isn't already a member. Then you could actually find the contact person for your institution. If you find out that your institution is not a member, feel free to contact us and see if we could help you to cover your DOI needs and services. If you're preparing a repository, then we will set you up the repository account once you have the account in the DataSite system. Important thing to note is there are various types of repositories. Specifically, if you will be interested in minting IGSNs, you will have to create a specific IGSN repository. Just final two recommendations when it comes to preparing your processes and workflows is to first try it out in the test environment before you actually start using it in the productions phase, and then also using draft status, actually verifying that everything works out well before you actually mint, let's say, a large number of DOIs that are assigned incorrectly. And here I'm passing the word back to Hana.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to skip the introduction of ORCID. I'm sure that you are, to a certain degree, familiar with the basics. A summary of the basic services. ORCID provides you with an ID, which is connected to an ORCID record that can serve as, let's say, your researcher CV. And they also run APIs that allow automated data exchange between the profiles and different systems. So ORCID works with the notion of authenticated ORCID ID versus unauthenticated. The authenticated is marked in a specific way in user interfaces, and what it means that the ID was actually verified through a sign-in process by the researcher, by the owner of the ID or of the profile. And as you are signing in, you can also give access to like further data exchanges with your profile to a specific system, including repositories. Regarding unauthenticated ORCID IDs, they should be also shown or displayed in a certain way in user interfaces. There should be this specific icon, and it should specifically say that the ORCID ID is unauthenticated. What does it mean? It means that there was no verification that the actual ORCID ID belongs to anyone. And this is how the verification process looks like. You see on the left side the button "Sign in with your ORCID ID." You are asked to submit your credentials, ORCID credentials. You are asked to review basically what you are signing up to, what you are giving your consent with, and when you select to authorize access, you end up with, or the system ends up with an authenticated ID from your side. So there's a couple of workflows of how ORCID IDs are collected in repositories. The first one is the preferred one, and that's via direct interaction with a researcher, where you go through this procedure that I just showed you, and there is or your ORCID ID gets verified through that. Second option, which is not a preferred one, although in reality this can happen, it's through mediated deposit. Obviously, there is unauthenticated ORCID ID that is being used, which is entered by someone else other than the owner of the ORCID ID. And the third option is through import or deposit from a third party of IDs that at some point might have been authenticated or not. But if you don't know for a fact that the IDs have been authenticated, you have to consider them unauthenticated. Once again, there are some best practices on how to work with ORCID in repositories. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically the main point is always try to prioritize authenticating or working with authenticated IDs as much as you can. Like really make sure you think about, even if you have some unauthenticated IDs, that maybe at some point you might be able to set up a process to authenticate them. ORCID provides two types of API. One is public. You can see the options offered by the public API on the slide. There is a member API that has some additional functionalities. You might be okay using the public API, but if you need some further features, you might need the member API, which is a paid feature of ORCID, and you can actually gain access to member API through the National ORCID Center. A couple of links to different key resources: the documentation, the guide how to integrate ORCID, APIs, and just generally the guidance for repository systems. So how do we support ORCID by the national or through the National ORCID Center? We currently have 28 member institutions. 20 of them are universities. We have a library of the Czech Academy of Sciences, etc. So it is quite likely that your institution is already a member. What can the member institution do? They can work with authenticated IDs. They can integrate ORCID into their systems, write information on ORCID profile of the institution's researchers, or possibly even download some information from their ORCID profiles. And once again, until the end of 2028, we are covering all the member fees for all our member institutions. How to get access to these ORCID services? First of all, check if your organization is already a member. If not, let us know. We will be happy to work with you. You should request access to Sandbox to test your workflow. You need to, before you launch your integration, you need to test it against a checklist that is done by ORCID. And once you are ready, you can start running your integration. An important part of this is to be able to communicate with your researchers and really communicate what does it mean for them, what is going to be 5 minutes, 1 minute, 5, okay, that's fine. And yeah, so really just you need to tell them, since you are asking for some interactions with them, you need to explain why you are asking them to do stuff. For instance, give your system consent to interact with their ORCID profiles. And last but not least, research organization registry ID. Very clearly, this is for research organizations, all types of research organizations, including libraries, archives, funders. It was created specifically to mark affiliations and funding acknowledgement as well. It is a common initiative run by California Digital Library, Crossref and DataCite, so the two registration agencies that Jakub was mentioning. And a few interesting details. ROR is completely open. It publishes all its data under the CC0 license, and they have an open API. ROR IDs do actually have a crosswalk to ISNI, Crossref, Fund Registry, and Wikidata. The National Library of Technology prepared a crosswalk between ROR IDs and ICHO, which will be published once again in the first quarter or in January of next year on GitHub. If you need to get a new ROR or modify an existing one, just drop us an email. We will be happy to do that for you. And how to access ROR data. There is a monthly data dump published in Zenodoc on this DOI. And of course, there is an API available. And there is a really nice documentation as well. And now, last slide, just to kind of reiterate what do these national centers bring to the table. So they are basically national consortia. They are, which means group of people or group of institutions that are using a certain service with better conditions. If the consortia did not exist, or the premium ORCID services, the same services that we are offering, would cost each institution basically or around 200,000 Czech crowns per year. For DataCite services, it would be at least 60,000 crowns per year. As Jakub mentioned, we do have the funding to cover everything until the end of 2028. We are striving to secure some funding after the time frame. But even in the worst case scenario, the member institutions or the consortia will still be existing, so the member institutions would still benefit from better conditions for those services. And just in general, the more institutions are part of these consortia, the better conditions for everyone. And in general, the more systems, the more people, the more institutions use persistent identifiers, the better their impact. And with that, we have a website, and thank you very much for your attention. I'm not sure if there are any questions.
Maybe I have.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any limitations on number of identifiers we can issue per repository or in general?
So you mean specifically DOIs, I assume? Yeah, no. But like every time that there is a new member, we are working with each institution. We are asking them what is the number of the DOIs that they expect to issue, and we can kind of make sure that it is valid. You know, because not all the use cases require assigning DOI to everything. Yeah, but technically there is really no limitation.
What numbers are you talking about, Richard? Millions?
Yeah. I would maybe mention like let's say the higher number, like the cost per DOI decreases. One more important thing is actually to make sure that like you don't surpass like the category just by a couple of DOIs, because then you like pay up for like the higher tier of the services. So for example, I think there's a limit around 1 million DOIs. So like if you're going to be assigning 900,000 DOIs, you're going to have the cost like is actually really low. But if you would get over like the million, let's say, and 10, then like the cost would be less. So it's more about like seeing like what kind of limit your institution would fill in, and to optimize the workflow that maybe in the year you assign some kind of a number where you fill into the top of the tier. But yeah, as Hana mentioned, there isn't really, the sky is the limit in some ways.
But there's a little asterisk that that we have in a contract that we sign with our member institutions, that in case we run out of money, basically because of extremely high numbers of DOIs minted, we can start charging the institutions some amount of money. But once again, yeah, I think we would need to discuss the use case and yeah, see how that can be handled.
Okay, thank you very much. Michal Klodner has a question for us.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if you can explain if there's some good practice for the case when some institution maybe says we want to quit with our repository. They are running some repository, they have assigned the DOI to their objects, but they decide it's not longer possible for us, and we will move these records to some other other repository which is bigger, or we just will collaborate there. What happens with this DOI? We have some special prefix, which are they working, resolving anymore after this, or does this new repository have to reassign these DOIs with their prefix, or how does it work?
So you can definitely, there's a couple of solutions. You can definitely transfer prefixes, you can transfer DOIs to, and in the worst case scenario, there are some archiving services, and in the very worst case, you can create tombstone pages for your DOIs, but obviously that's to be prevented. So there are strategies how to deal with this.
So the whole prefix can be transferred to different organization.